Hello, welcome to Global Lens. Over the next 30 minutes, we put the spotlight on all the top stories from around the world. I'm Parikshit Luthra. Our top focus this evening, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and US President Donald Trump held a telephonic conversation, their second in just 3 weeks. In a post on X, Prime Minister Modi said he congratulated President Trump on the success of the Gaza peace plan. The two leaders also reviewed the progress made in trade negotiations, agreed to stay in close touch in the coming weeks. President Trump had earlier called Prime Minister Modi on the eve of his birthday, their first direct conversation since the Trump administration imposed a 50% tariff on Indian exports. This latest call also comes soon after Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal's visit to Washington. How the two sides navigate India's purchases of Russian oil will be key to advancing trade talks, with Washington pressing for a halt, while New Delhi looks to maintain its energy autonomy. India, however, is exploring the option of increasing oil and gas imports from the US itself. Meanwhile, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told Fox News he expects India to gradually scale back Russian oil imports and pivot towards American energy supplies. He said both India and China have played a significant role in sustaining Russia's war economy through continued oil purchases.
We're doing a lot on Russia, but the real culprits here have been China and India in terms of buying Russian oil. They are keeping the Russian war machine going, and we put a 25% Russian oil tariff on India, and I think soon we're going to see a rebalancing where they're buying less Russian oil, more American oil, and if we were to do the same thing on China, I think the war would end quickly, but we need our NATO or European allies to join us. It's my strong belief that India is going to start rebalancing over the next few weeks and months, and we will see a diminishment of Russian oil in favor of U.S. oil.
And that's not all. U.S. Ambassador to India Sergio Gore and Deputy Secretary Michael Rigus will arrive in India later this week for a 6-day visit. They are expected to meet senior Indian officials to discuss key bilateral and regional issues. In a statement, the U.S. State Department said Washington remains committed to strengthening its strategic partnership with India and advancing a safer, stronger Indo-Pacific. Notably, 38-year-old Sergio Gore, a close aide of President Trump, is the youngest ever U.S. ambassador to India. Joining me now to take this further is Meera Shankar, former Indian ambassador to the United States. Ambassador Shankar, do the atmospherics look positive for a trade deal now?
Well, it looks, I would say, more positive than it did, let's say, a week ago, because you've had two conversations between the leaders. One in September, when President Trump called Prime Minister Modi to greet him on his birthday, and that broke the ice, as you will, and the two sides resumed trade consultations, first in Delhi with an official team, and then in the US when Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal went there for consultations. After that, you've had this conversation between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump, in which he has congratulated President Trump for the Gaza peace deal, and also said that the two sides, the two leaders will be in close touch, and that there had been progress in the trade negotiations, which they will monitor. So this is definitely a tone which is more optimistic than in the past.
Right. Ambassador Shankar, what we have understood is that more or less there was a deal on the table in June when India had proposed tariffs in the range of 10 to 15%. The US side had almost agreed to it as well, but the president felt it lacked ambition. What do you think the two sides would be doing in terms of positioning the deal? Do you think that's what is actually left right now? How do you position this as a victory for both sides?
Well, I think that somewhere they'll have to work around their differences. For instance, on oil purchases, India may not halt purchases from Russia, but balance it by buying more oil and gas from the US. Similarly, there could be other deals for purchases by India, maybe some quotas, for certain imports, which may be considered sensitive in India, where you could say certain amount would be allowed, up to this quota. And then after that, these would be tariff-based quotas. So the lower tariffs would apply only up to a certain quantity of imports, thereby safeguarding, the interests in India from being overwhelmed. So my sense is that they will find workarounds. They may not address some of these issues directly because I think it would be politically difficult, particularly on the Indian side. But, for President Trump, he has been fairly forthright in many of his about turns, let me say, on many issues. And the fact that, India and the Indian Prime Minister has commended his efforts in Gaza, and we support the peace plan. You've seen the latest statement, joint statement with the Prime Minister of the UK, where we have expressed our support for it and that we would like to work towards a durable ceasefire, an immediate and durable ceasefire, commencement of humanitarian assistance, and withdrawal of Israeli forces, and eventually a peaceful resolution, where there could be a two-state solution with a secure Israel and a viable Palestinian entity. So I think that the fact that the convergence, at least in West Asia,
Absolutely.
overrides, I think, many areas of dissonance.
Right. So clearly, Prime Minister Modi and India trying to give credit to Donald Trump for resolving tensions in the Middle East. What I would also like to ask you, what is the victory that we can give to Donald Trump? We've seen that with Japan, with Europe, with South Korea. All these nations, while striking deals with the US, somehow made announcements to the tune of billions and billions of dollars. Some of these deals are not on paper currently. But what can India do to give Donald Trump that victory?
Well, as I said, we would probably end up buying more from the US in a number of fields. We would lower tariffs, especially on manufactured goods and high-tech goods. And we probably will also look at stepping up Indian investment. So there's a range of things because obviously the trade talks were progressing and making some way towards finding a consensus because both sides were quite optimistic. And then, of course, the presidential approval was withheld. So it's not as though nothing had been worked out before that. The big area of the two areas where there was disagreement, one was agriculture and the other was India's purchases of Russian oil. And I think, as I said, both countries will have to work their way around these issues.
All right. Thank you very much, Ambassador Meera Shankar, for joining us with that very important perspective. All eyes right now, also on the ASEAN summit. And if Prime Minister Modi ends up going there, Donald Trump, of course, is going. But in case there is a meeting between the two leaders, we can expect some progress and some positive announcement on the trade deal if that happens. Thanks once again for being with us. Also on the show with me to decode the trade deal between India and the US is Mukesh Aghi, President of the US-India Strategic Partnership Forum. Mr. Aghi, thank you very much for being with us. Let me begin by asking you, how do you see this conversation between PM Modi and President Trump? The second in 3 weeks, and the Prime Minister noting that there has been positive progress in the negotiation.
Well, I think these are very positive developments. you have to understand that at some stage, when the president tweeted in a very negative manner, followed by Lutnick and Navarro also making some negative statements on India, that didn't go well in India itself. And you have a situation where the trust was broken. I believe now we're trying to build the trust back one tweet at a time, one phone call at a time, and I think it's moving in the right direction.
Right. Where do you feel things are right now? What is also important to note is that Sergio Gore is visiting India. He's not coming to take charge or present his credentials, but he's coming for a meeting with Indian government officials, and he'll be there almost for 2 or 3 days. What do you think is the message that he would be carrying from the Trump administration?
Obviously, the trade deal is important for the US and for India. And what we have is a position where Trump, as the president, would like to negotiate directly, and where we have a process in India where the prime minister does not get himself directly in negotiation. So we have a very big difference in style. And so that's where Sergio Gore comes in, who will come in and try to see what are the open items left. He can talk directly to the president and try to see if they can close the deal and move things forward.
Right. What's your sense about the mood in Washington at the White House about this trade deal with India? Are we near the finish line?
Well, obviously, I think that the mood is that let's find a way to close this thing, because any trade deal with India is important to the US, and so is for India, deal with the US is important. I think it's important to understand that India was one of the first countries which was about to close the deal, and somehow it didn't get it off the table, didn't close. It's time we close it and we start moving forward on other issues which we need to tackle between the two countries, be it on the climate side, be it on the geopolitical side. I think India and US will continue to move forward together as partners.
Right. What we also understand that while there are negotiations going on what should be the average tariff rate, there are non-tariff barriers, QCOs also being discussed. What's your view on what India can do to further ease things for US companies looking to invest?
Well, you have to understand it works both ways. And that means that there are certain things US has to do to help Indian companies succeed in the US market. And yes, we do have substantial non-tariff barriers which needs to be worked upon. That's where I would say that the Indian government is working with the US government to see what can be streamlined and move forward, because we would like to see more US investment coming into India. We'd like to see more technology coming into India, and all this creating more and more jobs for the citizens in India. So I think it is important for both countries to see where are the barriers and how you can move them. And that's the main point of discussion taking place between the two countries.
Right. You know, to speak to you about an issue which affects India very strongly, and that is the issue of rare earth. Clearly, the US-China tensions, and ahead of negotiations, the Chinese government has imposed further export controls on different kinds of rare earths, at least 5 to 6 new categories on lithium-ion batteries, which are used in electric mobility, and also manufacturing equipment related to rare earth and EV technologies as well. Very comprehensive restrictions. What would be your message to the Trump administration? Because this affects not just US companies, but US allies like India as well.
Well, China is exercising its leverage, is imposing its power on a global basis, trying to ensure that they are able to dictate terms and conditions to US and other countries. I think it's important that US India get together and focus on trying to build and develop rare earth policy between the two countries. India has tremendous capacity, both from technology perspective, from a skill perspective to build those. And I think that's where we like to see more US investment coming in, building a partnership between the two countries on rare earth, because the countries are being impacted by China's diktat on rare earth policy exports. Is impacting the auto industry in the US and also in India. So this sends a very strong message to India and the United States. Regardless of tariff or no tariff, we need to work together on rare earth between the two countries.
And finally, my last question to you would be, as you've been in India for the last few days, holding meetings with business leaders, with the government, are there areas of interest for US companies to invest in India right now? Are we going to see an active investment pipeline currently?
Absolutely. I have to say one thing, Parikshit. Last 2 months, I must have talked to 70 plus US CEOs. Not a single CEO has said that they will reduce the investment, or they will move the supply chain out of India, or they will not move forward in the global capability centers. The commitment, the interest, the market opportunity which India provides, US companies sees this in a very, very positive fashion. Regardless of the politics, the US companies will keep on investing and looking at opportunities for their product to be sold in India and also producing in India for the rest of the world. That interest continues without any hesitation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aghi, for joining us on the program today. We're taking a short break here on Global Lens. Up next, thousands of displaced Gazans are returning to the city as a ceasefire begins to take shape and Israeli forces withdraw from parts of the region. More on that on the other side. Welcome back to Global Lens. Thousands of displaced Gazans are returning to the city and Israeli forces are starting to withdraw from parts of Gaza as ceasefire takes effect. Most of Gaza's population was displaced by the war, which began in October 2023. Following the pullback of troops, Hamas has 72 hours to release 48 hostages, both living and deceased, in exchange for Israel freeing 250 prisoners and 1,700 Gazans. This development comes after the Israeli government approved Phase 1 of the peace plan. Reports suggest that the United States is likely to deploy 200 soldiers to oversee the ceasefire in Gaza. The U.S. military will establish a multinational task force that will include troops from Egypt, Qatar, Turkey and the UAE. U.S. President Donald Trump has demanded the immediate release of all hostages. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Hamas have praised Trump for brokering the deal. Netanyahu added that the next step in the peace process will be disarming Hamas, and he vowed to ensure that this is achieved, even if it means taking the hard way.
You sort of know what phase 2 is, but there will be disarming, there will be pullbacks, there will be a lot of things that are happening. I think it'll take place, and I think you're going to end up with peace in the Middle East. But we have to get our hostages back, and we weren't going to do it at the end, we're going to do it at the beginning.
Joining us now to take this discussion forward is Israeli Special Envoy Fleur Hassan-Nahoum. Fleur, thank you very much for joining us on the program. Has the Israeli government agreed to the Gaza peace plan, the 20-point plan, in its entirety?
Absolutely. The government have agreed to the 20-point peace plan, but we're doing it in phases because we have to make sure that Hamas, the terrorist genocidal group that started this whole thing, is actually going to live up to their commitments. And so that's why it's been done in phases.
Right. I would also like to ask you, will this plan deliver lasting peace? And on the ground, what is the expectation of how many hostages are likely to be released by the Hamas in the first phase? And how many are we likely to see released from the Israeli government side?
We don't have hostages. We have terrorist prisoners in our jails. They have hostages, civilians that they took from their homes and their beds. There's a big difference. At the moment, there's 20 living hostages. We have the list of the 20 living hostages and an extra 28 dead hostages, some of them in body parts. Hamas killed people, chopped them up in the Gaza envelope communities and the kibbutzes and took back heads with them. That's how they operated on that day. And so we hope to get, firstly, the living, because that is urgent. They've been starved and tortured in these dungeons that they've been in for 2 years. So the living ones, of course, are the urgent ones we need to get out immediately. And that's going to be done in the next 72 hours. We're praying that by Monday, they'll all be home. And this is why President Trump is actually coming to Israel on Monday to supervise the delivery of these living hostages, and shortly after, also the dead hostages, so that their families can give them a dignified funeral.
Right. I would also like to ask you, what will be critical in the next few days in terms of maintaining peace on the ground? Give us a sense of how US and Israel are going to be working together. The US is moving troops to this region to ensure that the ceasefire is implemented properly. How are the two countries likely to coordinate operations?
Well, this is actually a very dangerous time. So let me tell you what happened in the early hours of the morning before everything was signed up. Hamas terrorists killed an Israeli soldier, a 21-year-old boy. I imagine that family thinking that the war's going to be over, that the son who's fighting in the front lines in Gaza is coming home. And Hamas has to get a last kill just before the beginning of the ceasefire. So that's what we're dealing with right now. And so it's a very dangerous time, very dangerous time, because you're going to have these terrorists popping out from under the ground, from the tunnels. Some of them maybe less disciplined than others, all of them killers, trying to cause damage. So I'm hoping that Hamas can keep a lid on their own terrorists until we get to the phase of the release of the hostages.
Right. And at this point, who do you think is going to be responsible for governing Gaza? Is it the Israeli security forces who are going to be governing the area, making sure that there are no further attacks? And what about the Board of Peace? By when do you think this Board of Peace would be set up in order to look at the transition to a new government?
These are all great questions. Ultimately, Israel will remain in the security perimeter because we can't trust anyone with their own security. We put our guard down on October 7th and look what happened. So we will stay vigilant in our perimeter to make sure that nobody goes into our sovereign territory. And the governing board, the sooner the better. What we don't want is Hamas to continue governing Gaza, because Hamas are a jihadi terrorist group, Muslim Brotherhood, who have sworn in their charter to the destruction of the state of Israel. You can't have a lasting peace with these people in power. You just can't do that. And so I'm very much looking forward to some regional actors taking responsibility. Israel will not take administrative responsibility for the day-to-day life in Gaza. We never did want to do that. We left in 2005 so that they could have their own autonomy, self-determination, and maybe even the pilot of a Palestinian state. And instead, they turned it into a terrorist hellhole. And that's why October the 7th happened. So hopefully, now that other Arab partners in the region are involved on the day-to-day, people, countries that have money for reconstruction, countries that have experience with building good, prosperous economies, I'm very much looking forward to see what a force like that, a governing force like that, could do to Gaza, which could have been turned into a beautiful seaside enclave, and instead it was turned into a terrorist hellhole. So I'm hoping that the Emiratis and the Qataris and the Saudis and whoever else wants to be involved can actually be a positive influence in the region.
All right. Thank you so much, Fleur, for joining us. One final question on India's role. Do you see any role for India, very briefly?
Absolutely. I'm actually a special envoy for the foreign ministry, former deputy mayor of Jerusalem, but India has a very special role, especially in the extension of the Abraham Accords. There is a quadrilateral agreement that was signed with the US, the UAE, Israel, and India called I2U2, which talks about a regional prosperity, regional corridors with Saudi Arabia also involved. I see India as a very honest broker and a very good partner for Israel for regional prosperity.
All right. Thank you very much, Fleur, for joining us with the Israeli government's view on how things will move forward. Thank you once again for being with us. Finally, President Trump's relentless campaign for the Nobel Peace Prize has ended in disappointment. 58-year-old Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, who is currently in hiding, has been awarded the Nobel. The Nobel Committee citation said that when authoritarians seize power, it is crucial to recognize courageous defenders of freedom who rise and resist. A White House spokesperson criticized the committee for not picking President Donald Trump, who has been outspoken about his desire for the prize, claiming it chose politics over peace. With that, it's a wrap on another edition of Global Lens. Many thanks for watching. Goodbye.